In this video, we'll look at how array lists and functions can be used together to solve problems. First example, we'll look at how array lists can be returned from functions. So we're going to start here with a simple function to return an array list of integers of a specified number of values. So we'll start that off with a function call. That function call will look something like this, with assigning the result of the function to a variable of type ArrayList integer. And we'll display the result. So we'll say how many integers are in the list, and then show the list as a whole, with all the values. So plainly, this will not compile until we write this function, so we have to get at least a stub in. That, of course, will go outside of main, and it'll look like this. Of course, it's static. The type of the function is the same as the left-hand side of the statement that the function is used in. All right, so we're calling the function here. Right? The function result is being assigned to a variable of a given type. That type has to match, right, the type of the function. Right, then we have the name of the function and a parameter for how many elements we're going to create. Now, it's important to get to a compile point as soon as you can. So we'll just create an empty list and say return that. And as soon as we have a return statement in a function that is non-void, we can compile what we have so far. Okay, and even execute it. So we see then, okay, a list was actually created of size with 0 elements, and that's how an empty list looks. It's just square brackets with nothing in them. But we do want to create elements here, so we'll run a loop this many times. So we're not going to use a loop based on the size of the list, because at this point the list has 0 elements. So we want to write a loop something like this. So we write a for loop based on the parameter provided by the caller. In this case, it'll be 5. We can make it anything we want. So now we know the loop will execute 5 times. We'll have to add 5 values to this list. And we can add them one at a time. So the add method uses the name of the list followed by .add, and then the value we're going to add. Well, we don't have one yet, so we have to make it. To add is a new random number. Let's say numbers from 1 to 20. Okay, and then this is what we want to put into the list. Let's give that a try. And 5 elements. All right, there we are. All right, so we see lists being returned, created and returned as function values. All right, and then you can manipulate it. Now, notice that the name you use in the function does not have to correspond to the name you use in the caller, because you might be using it to create more than one list. All right, for example, let's say I call this the list of 5 ints. Let's say I have another one. I'll change these names consistently so that we don't have any errors. List of 5 ints. The list of 5 ints. All right, there's a list of 5 elements, list of 7 elements. So you can make however many elements you want. Right? As a matter of fact, I want to show that by providing a command line argument. Right, so instead of a constant, a literal number embedded in the program, I'm going to use that as a default if I don't provide anything on the command line. Right, so I'm going to do something like this. and then I'll say num else equals this default size. Now, if I provided any command line arguments, well, that would look like that. If args dot length greater than 0, that's equivalent to asking, are there any command line arguments? If there are, I'm going to assume that the first one is a number, and I'm going to make num else be that number. Well, now we don't know if it's 5 or not. I'm going to take this out again. Because I don't know how many it's going to be. So if I don't provide a command line argument, I have 5. But if I want to make a bigger list, I can say the number, right, and I'll get that many elements. I can also make a smaller list. Next, I want to show how ArrayLists can be used as arguments in two functions. All right, so we've seen now a function can produce and return an array list. Likewise, a function can accept an array list as an argument. Let's say I want to find the highest value in this list that I'm creating. Start that by extending the code in main with a call. So I have a new variable and a new function. I say this function is going to find the max in the list. All right, so here I'm using the list of ints as an argument into a function. Right, and I'm getting back just an integer result. And followed by a print statement, right, to show the result, and a message that lets me know that the function is over, that the program is over. All right, so this function has to be written yet. We're not going to compile with just a call. Symbol not found. Max in list isn't there yet. All right, so we have to write that. Find max in list. The parameter now has to match the argument. Well, list of ints is an array list of ints. Notice how I found the declaration in the caller. And that has to correspond to the parameter. So I'm just going to paste that in there and give it a name. It doesn't have to be the same name because you can use it on different lists. All right, so here I'm going to have a result. You're going to initialize that to the first thing in the list, which would be get 0. So we can check that. We can even run that now. Okay, and we see, okay, sure, we're getting the first thing in the list no matter what it is because we're not comparing it to anything else yet. All right, 19, well, there is something high. That's pretty high, but there is something higher. All right, so we have to have more of this function, right, to now find the maximum. This will use a traditional for loop based on the size of the list because this list does have elements in it. It's not empty. Unlike the new list we created here, we couldn't base the loop on the list because this was a new empty list. Here, it's a list being provided by the caller, so you assume it has something in it. Right? So you can base your loop on the size of the list. All right, so in here, we have to compare, right, int val index. Right, so we get the value from the array and see if it's larger. So if val is greater than the result that we had before, well, then that needs to be the result. And highest is 15, so you can check visually. Right? 14 was first. So you run a few examples, right? And make sure it's working right. Try some with more numbers, and there you are. Right? So we have now array lists that coming out of functions and going into functions. Functions can also change array lists that are passed into them. So in this last example, we'll see that. Suppose I have need to double all the values in a list. So we're going to look at a couple of ways of doing that. First solution will be a void function that modifies the argument. So we're going to do a little before and after here. So we're going to look at the values as they are. Then we're going to call a void function. See, that's the whole statement right there. It's a standalone statement. That's how you know it's void, because no return value is being captured. We're going to send the array and then look at it again, print it again, and we'll see that it's different. All right, so we have to write this function. Put that right here. And static void increase by doubling. And the parameter is the array list. All right, so that's going to look like this. Just lift it from this other function here. Void functions are easy to get to this point because there is no return value. So we can see if this compiles with just that much. Now we have a stub. All right, so how are we going to do this? Well, we need to go through the elements in this list and then replace them back with the doubled value. All right, so overall control is going to be a for loop. Braces as a compile point. All right, so what we're going to do now is get a value out of the integer, the array list of integers. Now I want to double that value. And put it right back into the array. That's the set. The set method requires two arguments because you have to say which element you're setting. Right, the index comes first. Right, that's the which element you're changing, and then the value you're changing it to is the second argument. Compiles, clear, it's time to run that. Okay, and there you see, okay, so list of ints before doubling, that's the output from statement 30, line 33 there, and see what the values are. Then immediately after that, the next output is the list after being doubled, and you can see that each element is twice what it was originally. Sometimes you have to preserve values, right? If we had this problem, to double all the values in a list, but preserve the original values, we'd have to do it a slightly different way. But say I needed to preserve the numbers and make another list of doubles that was doubled. Well, that would require me to return a new list. So I'd have to return a new list. That's what we see here. So this function now has to be written. That'll look like this. Of course, static. This has a return value. So I'm getting a type on here. Make doubled list. And the parameter itself is also it's the same list. Right. So here I want to make a new list. So making a new empty list, and now do something similar we did to the same list, right? Get a value out, double it, and then instead of putting it back into the same list with set, we're actually going to use add to put it on the end of this new list. And then that's what we return. So here we have the list of ints after doubling. Right, that's from here. All right, so the list of ints has been doubled. But now we make a new list, a doubled list, which has everything doubled again. But the old list of ints, which we're outputting here, is still the same as it was before this call. Which way you go on something like this depends on the specifics of the problems. But now you know how to do it either way.